Let me guess. You've been thinking about starting that YouTube channel, that photo series, that podcast, that first client project, but every time you sit down to begin, there's a voice in your head that says, "Not yet. It's not ready. I'm not ready." What if I told you the ugly version of your idea, the messy one, the imperfect one, that's the one that actually gets you started? This is your reminder. Perfection is a trap. And starting ugly, that's the superpower that gets creatives off the sidelines. How can beginner creatives learn to separate useful standards from paralyzing perfectionism?
So from my perspective, I think there is some merit, a lot of merit into like doing your first project. Your first project's ugly, right? Just to get experience, just to get, your first few out the way, and then you learn throughout the process. So that is useful, but I do also think it's important that as you're doing your projects ugly, is to try your best to make it look beautiful, so to speak. So do it ugly, understand that it won't be your best, right? This would be the worst your work looks at this point in your career, this point in your creative journey, whatever project you're working on. But I do suggest people put their all into it. So learn as much as you can. Take your time with the project, right? Even though you're doing it to get it out there, put it out to the world so you can get more reps in, try your best. So if you're doing films, for example, try your best to study film, to look at color grading, to look at the rhythm and the beat of films or 3-act structures, shot selection, composition, right? Look at other movies, study other movies, so that as you're taking in all this like information, try to put that into your work, your ugly work. Because again, this is the worst that your work will look. So even though the project may not come out as your heart desires, so to speak, or like the way you want the work to look, I still suggest creatives still put their all into it to try to make it as perfect as possible. But you do get to a point where just like, okay, this is good enough. One of my favorite producers from back in the day, Dr. Dre, right? He's produced so much music, and he was like, someone was asking him, like, when do you think the beat is ready? And he was like, you don't get to a point where you feel like the beat is complete for the most part. You just get to a point where it's like, it's good enough to put out there. It's good enough to share. But I guarantee you he's putting as much as his talent, his creativity, and his uniqueness into his work as possible. And to other people, to him too, I'm pretty sure he's satisfied with his work, but to other people it's fantastic work. But to him, it's like, I could have used, maybe a cut there, maybe a couple sounds here, or maybe I could have taken this out. But the idea is to put your best work, your best foot forward into your beginning works, even if they don't turn out the way you want them to. Sometimes you surprise yourself, but even though you're doing this project to do it ugly, get your first ones out there, still put your all into it and try to make it as best as possible, because that's the real skill that you're learning. Don't just do it, paste it together, just put some stuff out, because I don't think you learn as much when you do that. So just make sure you're really putting in as much, of the things that you've learned, put that into your work, even though this is the worst your work will look at this point in your career or this point in your journey.
Let's talk about where this pressure comes from. We grew up being graded, judged, ranked. Everything had to be neat, correct, buttoned up. Then we open social media and all we see are polished reels, million-view podcasts, top-tier videos. No one shows their start. But I promise you, it was rough, cringeworthy even. That fear you're feeling? It's not laziness, it's perfectionism pretending to be logic. I don't have the right gear. I need one more course. I'll wait until I have more time. Sound familiar? Do you ever revisit your early work? And if so, what does it teach you about creative growth?
So I would probably have to say, for me, my earliest work where I put work out that was so-called ugly, right? I would have to say that would take me back to the very beginning of realizing that I have some creative juice in me somewhere, right? Because I feel like after I got through graphic design, by the time I got to photography, I really had a voice. And it's probably just from years of like being inspired by music, movies, other photos, other photographers. And by the time I started to put pen to paper, so to speak, right, or take pictures and got a camera and started taking pictures, I had a voice early. And you can even ask, people that started following me early, they were like, yo, your voice is strong with your work. And I was surprised myself because I was like, yo, I just started probably weeks ago, and people are like, yo, your work is powerful, right? But I think for me to have gotten to that point, it started with graphic design for clients. I think my homie Tony Moore is my first client. When I moved back up to Philadelphia from Florida, he was like, yo, I need a graphic designer. We got all kinds of concerts and things going on for his groups. Can you start putting some stuff together? Can you be my designer? And I enjoyed the work. I enjoyed the learning process of putting the stuff together. But, looking back, it wasn't like my greatest work. It wasn't very exciting work. And this is no shade to, a Tone and like the crew and stuff like that. But it just, wasn't very inspiring. But I was glad I had a reason to spend hours and hours and hours on Photoshop and different programs that I was learning. And, there was a lot of those projects that I put out, and it was like I'm not really excited about this joint. It could be a lot better. I don't have the skill set at this point in my career and in my journey to like articulate my vision, take what's in my head and put it on, graphic or a digital piece of media, stuff like that. So I didn't have that, but I did understand that like I'm learning a lot through this process, even though I'm putting out work that I'm not inspired by. And I think from doing that for years, by the time I got to a medium in photography that I'm like, yo, I really like this medium, I already had a voice because I had spent hours and hours and hours and hours working on these flyers, looking at composition, looking at scale, looking at a color theory and everything that goes with like putting together a flyer that communicates an idea and stuff like that. So I would have to say graphic design was where I got my education as far as the language of like the visual language, right? And that just, I think seamlessly transferred over to photography, which easily transferred over to translated to film and videography and my podcast and stuff like that. So yeah, I would say my graphic design.
Ever look back at early Casey Neistat videos or the first few episodes of a now famous podcast? Bad lighting, muffled audio, weird pacing, random editing. But they kept going. And that's what matters. The courage to begin before the confidence arrives. The first thing that comes to your mind when someone says, I'll start when I have more time.
I would tell people you got to stop, man. Like, I get it, what they say, paralysis by analysis. People get hung up on, not having the right gear, not having the right resources and stuff like that. But if it's been months, right, and years, and I've seen it happen to people I know that are close to me, certain clients that come to me where they're waiting and waiting and waiting for this right time to put out work. It gets to a certain point where it's like, all right, man, you can only wait but so long before you start exercising this muscle, right? So if you've been thinking about starting, even in the midst of you still thinking about starting, start some part of the process. Maybe it's just you take, a certain period of time to just look at images, right? Just using the film thing, for example, look at images, right? Taking a lot of information as far as like looking at images, composition, watching movies, listening to music, soundtracks, getting inspiration. So instead of you just sitting there thinking about the process and not starting any part of the process, I suggest you start the process. Even if you're not starting the project yet, you have started the project by starting the process. And again, there's many steps in a workflow. So just pick and choose certain parts of the workflow where you could just start taking an inspiration, start putting out little teasers, do a little, create an image here, take a picture there, collect a playlist of potential music that you want to put in your pieces. You have to start somewhere. But if you're waiting months and then years and you haven't taken any step, you got to stop playing with yourself. What's the phrase? Take a shit or get off the toilet. If this is something you want to do, this is the best time to do it. And not only is now the best time to do something. What they say the best time to do something was like years ago. The second best time is right now. In the grand scheme of where we are historically, there's never been a better time to be a creative ever in history. with the power of the internet, the connectivity of the internet, you can learn things, the skill set from the internet. You can find inspiration from other people in your field. You can learn the process. You can practice the process without real judgment either. Like I said, nobody's going to crucify you if you're a photographer, you put pictures out that don't look like, Irving Penn or some other photographer, Casey Knight, what's his name, Peter McKinnon. Nobody's going to judge you for that, for real. And if they do, I mean, you on your journey. Who really cares about what somebody says about your work? And even that process doesn't stop. Even when you're at the top of your game and you putting out work that you feel in your heart is great, you're going to have most people that probably enjoy your work, but then you will always have a percentage of people it just doesn't jive with. Some of my favorite directors, I look at their movies and I'm like, these are perfect movies. Like, it doesn't get better than this. But then I'll ask somebody else and be like, it didn't really, connect with me like that. And that's fair. That's the creative process. Most important thing is just put out work that you enjoy and that you feel is good for your vision, right? Because it's not about being who's the best photographer. How do I become a better photographer, or like the best photographer? It's really about just putting your voice out there and being the best at putting your stuff out there. So when people see your work, when people experience your work, they know it came from you.
Here's how you put this into motion starting today. Commit to hacking at one creative piece of work this month. It can be bad. In fact, let it be bad if that's where it ends up this time. Just create it for the sake of skill building. Remember, done is better than perfect and data is better than done.